Now, did you get that notification off the lady?
Yes, I certainly did.
Okay, perfect. So can you hear me, Matt?
I can, Oisin. How's it going?
Not so bad. It's a rainy, just early evening in Ireland at the moment. So we had about 3 or 4 days of beautiful weather, and now it's turned to shite. As well, it's Ireland. I guess get used to it.
I miss the terrible weather. I miss it a lot.
You're in Texas, actually.
No, it's Phoenix, Arizona.
Ooh.
I'm in the desert. It's around 115 at the moment Fahrenheit. So that's around, I don't know, 45, 46 degrees.
That sounds horrible.
The other day it was 121. That's 49 degrees. That was.
Jesus. So you just don't want to be outside, basically.
Yeah, you don't spend a lot of time outside, or you'll cook, but it rained the other day, so it cleared everything out. So I got a little bit of taste of home with some rain for a day.
The smell of the rain on tarmac is always quite nice.
It is. You don't get it here often. It's incredibly dry.
But anyway, we should probably get down to the meat of this. This is going to be like the companion videos that I do for the other episodes, but I wanted to kind of include you in this one as you wrote the Pat Finucane episode. So I'd like to kind of, maybe for people who are listening or people who are watching, to people to get an understanding as to why you came into the show and why you wanted to be part of the podcast and your kind of your background, I guess, in a nutshell. So you're originally from Northern Ireland, is that correct?
Yes, I'm from a little town in the north called Omagh, and I lived there when I was quite young. I was born there, and then I lived in Belfast as well for a long time. I kind of moved between Omagh and Belfast, so two different sides of Northern Ireland, really. The country lifestyle, more kind of small town, and then obviously the city. So I got kind of a nice perspective of Northern Ireland, two different kind of sides of the coin,
I'd imagine that was like late 80s, early 90s, was it?
Yeah. When I moved to Belfast, I think I was around 5 or 6 years old. So it would have been the late 80s, 88 or so, through to the early 90s. And then I moved back to Omagh and then moved back up to Belfast, I think just around the Good Friday Agreement. So a good time to be in the capital, yeah.
Oh, I'd imagine. And do you remember much of the Troubles, like at the time, or were you too young?
Remember much of the Troubles? Well, I guess I'm trying to think of my first memory of the Troubles. We used to travel down south a lot with my grandmother and my grandfather, and we used to go down to Malachy. That's where we used to holiday. So we go down to Malachy for a long weekend or whatever.
Yeah.
And when you travel down from Omagh, you have to go through Kesh. You go through Kesh and you go down past the border around there. And there used to be barrack stops there. And I think one of my first memories of the car being stopped and having to get out, and they check the car for devices, obviously questioning my grandfather who's driving the car. So that's one of my first memories that I can think of. Obviously, we kind of thought it was fun almost.
It was. Well, of course, it was an exciting event. Yeah.
These guys with big guns and you know what I mean, in the army uniform. It was kind of strange.
I think we had. Oh, sorry. You go. Then I'll go.
Yeah, my grandfather was always fine with it. He was always pleasant with them. It was just a way of life. He understood it. Okay, have a look. He was even joking with them. He's kind of funny guy, my grandfather. So.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking. I think one of my earliest memories of Northern Ireland is somewhat similar. Like I'm about 31, or I am 31 now. But so we used to travel up to Northern Ireland as kids because that's where you could buy fireworks. You can go across the border, you could buy your fireworks, and then at Halloween, your house was the house that every kid wanted to be at because you had all of the mad things. But I do remember I must have been going into Derry or something as like a kid, but it was exactly the same. It was like I don't know who it was, but it was like it was a checkpoint where they had machine guns, and I remember looking at the machine guns and just being shocked, like to see. I was like, what, like, what's the purpose? You know, just it's so out of your what you're used to in life. It's so bizarre, I guess.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, I have lots of obviously other memories. Omag's a barrack town. So there's an army barracks, a very, very large army barracks. I think it's been turned into, I think it was basically decommissioned or whatever the equivalent is for a barracks. And now it's a police station or whatever. But we, in the town, you would have, members of the army soldiers walking through with their guns and whatnot.
Mad.
Looking very serious and dangerous. When you're a kid, you kind of stay away. But yeah, and obviously when I moved to Belfast when I was a kid, my mother went to university up there, and she did an art degree in the University of Ulster, and we were living in Shaftesbury Square, so that's the other side of Belfast, of the city centre, for anyone who knows Belfast. So often we go from one side of the city to the other, and by the town hall there was the massive, the gridiron, what do you call it? Like the gated checkpoints that you had to go through. Yeah. It was pretty grim. I was talking to my mother about this actually. She was like, it was really like pretty gray and dreary, and like, that sort of thing was you took it for granted at the time because it was normal, I guess.
Yeah, you got used to it. It was just a part of daily life, and you look back on it and you're like, Jesus, like it was pretty intimidating stuff, I guess.
When I talk to people who aren't from Ireland, I lived in England for a long time, and talk to now people from America, they're always I kind of realize when I'm telling them, oh, this is not normal, this is this is strange, the kind of threatening atmosphere. Although we just kind of took it for normal. It's just the way it was, eh?
Yeah, it's madness. Well, that's kind of the thing. Like, that's, I guess, one of the reasons I was interested in getting going with the podcast was that most people hadn't a clue. Like a lot of people have reached out to me and said they just thought that the Troubles was like the IRA just causing a stir, and that was their portrait. That's what they'd seen on the news. Like, this is people from the UK or people from America, and they didn't realize that there was like many different layers, and it was a very, very complex affair. So it's been great to be able to, like, it's like people reaching out who are actually, well, I hate using really positive words about this, but people are very excited to learn about what actually kind of happened, or the try to get beyond the complex nature of everything, basically, because it's an incredibly dense and complex period of history. So it's very hard to really just take the strands apart and kind of explain it, I think, in a simple way. Yeah. So that's kind of been the aim for the past couple of years now. I've been going a year and a half at it, so it's good length of time.
Yeah, I suppose if I was going to ask you a simple question, it would be like, what compelled you initially to think I'm going to do this podcast, on the Troubles?
Oh, I had an idea for a podcast banging around my brain for a while. I've been listening to them for like 10 years. I've always wanted to do one. And then, of course, there's Case File, which is like the gold standard of true crime podcasts at the moment. It's narrated by an Australian guy. Very, very simple. It's just him speaking about the case. No faff, nothing overly complicated. It's a very simple delivery, and I think it's the most popular true crime podcast in the world right now. So I always loved his style, and I was like, if I ever do a true crime podcast, it'll be in that sort of vein, in a very similar vein. And and then I think I was watching a documentary or something, and I came across the Mountbatten assassination, which is the first episode of this podcast. And I was just like, kind of floored. I was like, this was a massive thing that Irish people know nothing about, absolutely nothing about it. And when I kind of looked into it, and I was like looking at the various, I was looking up sources and things, and there is nothing in the podcast world. There is virtually nothing on the Troubles. There's a couple of podcasts about the Troubles that are kind of designed for someone who's well versed in the history of the area to jump straight in. But there's nothing for someone who has no idea what the Troubles is. So I kind of, to be honest, I wanted to do a true crime podcast, and I noticed there was a gap. There was nothing in the podcast world in the same way that I wanted to do this. So I was like, well, why not? Why not try it and see if it works, if people want to listen to it. So
it worked out well. It's a nice piece of work.
Yeah, it's been going well. Like I'm amazed. I've got through 2 seasons now. It's a lot. Like I've basically written a book. When I totted up the word total there, it's over 100,000 words with all the episodes. So that's basically a book, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess an interesting thing would be like how I kind of got into your podcast, because it's kind of the similar sort of thing, as in I was looking, I'll actually go back. It was basically my daughter, right? My daughter, I was trying to do some sleep training, right? So she was going down for naps, and she's kind of, what would I say about her? She's kind of a little sensitive soul. She didn't want you to leave the room while she was going down.
Okay.
So I put her down, right? I put her down in bed in the cot, and she obviously she's going to sleep. And I'm sitting there in a dark room, and I was like, I'm really bored here, and I'd either fall asleep in the middle of the day, or I'd listen to something. I was like, you know what? I'll have a listen. I'll try and find a podcast. I thought I'll try and find a Troubles podcast. And then I stumbled across the Troubles. And so I think in about 2 days, I listened to nearly every episode.
Jeez.
Yeah, I kind of binged the Troubles, whatever it had there, because I was totally compelled by it. Up until that point, I wouldn't say necessarily avoided anything to do with the Troubles, but I kind of felt like I had been so involved with it in many different ways. I kind of like I shied away from watching movies on it or anything of the sort. So it was really it was fantastic actually experience to kind of listen to all that information, because I have to say it's really nicely, cleanly done. It's very I like the parody of it. It's kind of like bipartisan, you would say.
Yeah, well, like that's every single effort is to try and make it as right down the middle as possible. So I'm very conscientious of that, because if there's any form of bias in it, then I feel like it loses a lot of its integrity. So it's like I just want to write and feel empathy for the victims, and that's kind of it. So it's sometimes I feel like I get it across well, and sometimes I feel like I always need to work on it. So it's just something I'm very critical of throughout the entire process.
It's a fine line. It's a fine line. And actually listening to the episodes, and then eventually, obviously, we've worked together on one. It kind of really opened up how connected it was. Obviously, living in Northern Ireland's one thing, but there's so many kind of them incidents that I was actually connected to. Like I said earlier, we used to holiday in Malachy. It's the same place Lord Mountbatten was killed, obviously.
Yeah, you went to school with beside someone, or what was you told me at school?
Someone was in my class, was the son of one of the Gibraltar shooting IRA members in St. Malachy's College. And then the episode, only when I got into writing the Pat Finucane episode and just kind of mapping out everything, and really like, yourself, you had for every sentence you write, there's maybe 3 or 4 hours of actual research. But I was looking at the map, and I was like, where Pat Finucane actually lived was 5 minutes walk from where I was at school every day.
Jeez, yeah,
I used to walk past his house all the time, on pretty unwittingly. It's not something that was ever made a big deal of.
Yeah.
But listening to your podcast was like a really good, like I say, kind of avenue into exploring that history. And I feel like I'm at an age now, I'm in my late 30s, where I can kind of evaluate that stuff a little bit more. Kind of like sometimes the emotion gets the better of you, but kind of you can compartmentalize it a little bit more. You can look at it as a historical thing.
Well, maybe now would be a good time to get into the one of the larger events that happened in your life that I guess I covered in an episode without realizing it. But if you'd want to maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Oh yeah. Well, obviously I'm from Omagh, like you said. And there was a massive incident there, the Omagh bomb. That happened in 1998. It killed 31 people. That's 29 adults and 2 unborn children. And one of those adults was my grandmother, Elizabeth Rush, and she owned a little shop, a beautiful little shop selling antiques and kind of knickknacks, just right opposite where the car bomb was placed. It was placed by a splinter group of the IRA called the Real IRA, and they, I think it was mainly to kind of disrupt the Good Friday Agreement. That was their main aim. Unfortunately, my grandmother was owned a shop opposite, and I think she died instantly. So this was a massive incident in my family's life,
Of course, it was huge. It was like we're so close to peace, and then this on a larger scale, and then on a personal scale, it was just the revulsion was everywhere, absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, it's such late stage in the Troubles. Obviously, it had already been signed, the Good Friday Agreement, I think, by that stage, and this was the largest incident and loss of life in the entire Troubles. So it was a really big deal. Obviously, the town I was from, I wasn't living there at the time. I was living in Belfast, but it's a small market town, very sleepy. It's got both Protestant and Catholic communities, and they tend to live in quite peaceful situation. So to strike a place like that was quite shocking, at the time. And it's one of them old cliches. Up until that point, and I'd say most of my family felt like this. You really didn't feel like it could happen to you. You kind of lead your life with, obviously incidents are happening here, there, and everywhere. But it was quite a massive change in kind of our family and the way we viewed and the way I viewed the Troubles and the history of Ireland, actually.
How old were you at the time, Mal?
I was around 14.
14. So it's an age where you'll vividly remember every detail as opposed to being a bit younger and kind of sheltered from it, kind of.
Yeah, I remember the day I was in Omagh at the time. I was down staying with my grandmother and my grandfather, and we lived not far from the city centre. Lived actually my mother lives there now, but it's actually apparently the smallest street in Ireland, so they say.
Great.
Michael Street. Yeah, that's where my grandfather bought they had planned to build a street the whole way through, and my grandfather bought it when there was only one house there, and he bought all the land, so it's got the name of Michael Street, but it's only got
just one house
on it. Yeah, so there you go.
Interesting.
Yeah, but so I was there. I had been spending a lot of time, obviously, going down to my grandmother's shop and helping her out, and usually it happened on a Saturday. Usually I would go down on a Saturday, meet up with friends, and then go and spend some time in the shop with her, but I decided not to that day, and I was actually in the house when I went off, and I remember that the front door of my grandmother's house, it kind of, I thought someone had kicked it, actually, or a ball had hit it. I thought one of my friends had come around to say, "Hey, you coming out, to have a kick around or something." And I went to open the door and there was nobody there. I thought, that's very strange. So I went down, sat and watched TV or was playing computer games or something. And it wasn't until later I got a phone call off my aunt saying, "Oh, there's been a bomb in the town." And then later on, another friend came around to the house and said, "You'll have to come down. Something's happened." So
so that they knew they're the first ones to know when they came and kind of told you, but they didn't want to tell you explicitly, or
yeah, I think I I kind of thought that it wasn't as big a deal because bombs happened, like pipe bombs and them kind of incidents had happened in the town before. So I didn't think it was as big as it was. I was young, obviously. But then I went down with my friend and we went to look for my grandmother up at the hospital. I wouldn't describe too many of the scenes, but it was, it was an eye opener. It was pretty shocking.
Yeah.
And very, kind of an unpleasant thing, obviously.
Oh, of course. Was your grandfather on the scene, or was he?
No, he wasn't. It was actually me
Okay.
that told him. He had been out of town, and I met him when I came back. I think I said I'd been up at the hospital, but we couldn't find her. And I came back down to the house, and my grandfather was there. He had been out of town, and that's when I told him. Obviously, he ran off straight away to go up to the hospital. That's when I had his Lawrence rush,
Yeah.
who later would be a big part of campaigning for various things in the town. First of all, he campaigned to save the hospital because of all the good work he felt that they did during the bomb incident and so on. And then later, he, because of the various faults in the investigation, he was campaigning and for an investigation into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But
well, sorry to, could I just roll it back a tiny bit? So how did you find out then that your grandmother had passed away? Sorry, I missed that part.
I was probably the last one to find out. I think everyone else
Yeah.
kind of knew, and being young, and I was very close to actually my grandmother. Like I said, I used to spend a lot of time down at the shop. And we went
Yeah.
down to Malachy, I think a week or two before we went and spent a week in Malachy Moor down the holiday home that they had down there. So we were very close. So I think the rest of the family, they had found out maybe a day before, or kind of found out just before, or they kind of knew also, because if the names weren't appearing, it, you know,
Yeah, and the
it's
location of the bomb
everything.
directly outside her shop. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone was, what would you say? There was still a little bit of hope, but I think the adults that knew, they had realized, and then obviously my mum, I think, told me. Yeah, it was heartbreaking. So it
Yeah,
was.
absolutely. Well,
Yeah, that might have been a week later, I think. Around about a week later, I'd say.
and how old was she?
She was not old at all, in her, I think, early 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she was maybe even slightly younger than that, maybe late 50s, early 60s. So, quite young to have your life taken away, obviously.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, it's obviously run a successful business. She had that business in the town centre for many, many years. I think over 15, 20 years or more. And my grandfather had two other businesses in the town. He had run a sign business, Rush Signs, and he owned a cafe close to the bus stop. So they were big, big figures in the town. Obviously,
Yeah.
well known.
Well, it does kind of, it makes it a lot more understandable when you say that, like, oh well, I haven't looked back on this part of your life or this part of history. You avoided the troubles because they they took a lot from you and your family. So it's very understandable that something so raw and so painful is something that just kind of gets locked away and you move on with your life, kind of. I think, well, I don't know if that's how you feel, like how you have reacted since, but for me, it's a very understandable reaction, I think, in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was kind of ever present as well. People always had very strong opinions about stuff from one side or the other, and I kind of rejected a lot of it. I kind of thought it all felt maybe to a young man, all a little bit pointless, you know. So I guess it kind of shifted my mentality, definitely, and like I said, I tended to avoid as much as you can when you live under the circumstances, kind of avoid it. And it wasn't just, obviously the incident happened, it was terrible, she was murdered, but there was a big fallout afterwards. The family, it was very difficult for my grandfather to handle, because she was just taken away from him so suddenly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it kind of disrupted our entire way of life.
Yeah.
And she was a very, a very special woman, and she kind of bound our family together in a way.
Yeah, I could say my grandmother was exactly the same. She keeps the loose connection of all the brothers and sisters and family, that it's the grandparents have a tendency to keep. And my grandmother was exactly the same. Like once she passed away, the family had quite a significant drift. And
I think in a similar way, definitely. Yeah, she was, she was quite quiet woman, but unassuming, but yeah, like I said, she bound everyone together. So, and as well, a woman who was totally uninvolved with any solely separate from any of the, the big political stuff, or didn't really, prescribe to any faction or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what's often said about the Omagh bombing. The Omagh bombing killed like children, pensioners, Protestants, Catholics. Like, it was completely indiscriminate. And I think that, I've made this comparison before, but in the sense where Bloody Sunday really ramped up the violence, the Omagh bombing was something that just everyone just said no more. There was, it was so horrific in what it was. And I'm not saying that a targeted bombing would have been in any way less destructive, but just the sheer wanton murder, it beggars belief.
Yeah, it kind of pains me to say it, but it feels like, obviously I can look back and look at it. It feels like an incident that kind of had to happen. Maybe if it hadn't have happened in Omagh, it would have happened elsewhere. But it kind of, the Good Friday Agreement, it kind of, it gained credence after that. People said this has to work.
Yeah.
This can't continue. This has to end.
Yeah. So though the Good Friday Agreement, what many perceived it not to be perfect, or many even just disagreed with, they said we have to put something in place to stop this. Or I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a sad way to think of it, but the incident itself kind of, maybe once it was signed and people were getting behind it, because a lot of people didn't want it to happen and still want it to be broken apart, but it bound a greater unity of the people to kind of say this murder has to end, because these are innocent people, and it's time to move on from this kind of attitude.
Which I guess we kind of have. we have, in a sense. It feels ever present, this ominous threat, and especially during the protests against the Northern Ireland Protocol and that sort of stuff. I imagine, and I'm confident we're not going back there, but they're just kind of concerning times, I guess, is the only way to put it. Things are people are very, very concerned about if they're being looked after. There's a lot of unionists that feel like they're completely forgotten about now, and they're being swallowed up by Republican Ireland, which is. And there's been a lot of videos I've been watching recently over the past that people are very, very happy and willing to go back to violence. Whether that'll happen, I hope not, and I don't think so. But there is a very ominous threat, I feel.
Yeah, obviously I'm from a Catholic background, and I'd say before the Omagh bomb, there was a lot of maybe nationalist sentiment. I was a young man. A lot of people, in my community would support that. Obviously, after the bomb, my opinions changed, but them kind of attitudes still remain among a lot of people. And on the other side, it's the same for Unionists and Protestants. And that's why the Good Friday Agreement worked, because it was finding a place in between where they could both communities could exist. They could still have their culture, and still go forward, and it wasn't threatened. And unfortunately, the powers that be didn't really consider this with Brexit, and it's put this pressure on the agreement now, which was always a delicate balance.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I understand definitely the perspective, I would say, of people who want to stay true to unionism and want to protect their community. Obviously, that protocol doesn't work for them, and they feel threatened by it, and that's why the Good Friday Agreement was so important. It's not perfect. It had to make a lot of concessions for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It worked, and it had been working for 20 years. But let's hope that they can find some sort of agreement that's going to suit people, so they don't feel so threatened.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting next couple of decades. It really will, especially when, like, I'm of the opinion that I'd say Sinn Féin will probably be the dominant political party in Ireland probably within the next decade. So they very, like, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil had to go into a coalition this year or last year, I guess, to beat them basically. So that'll be very interesting. How they'll work together with Sinn Féin in the north as well, or how they'll work together with different policy or across this particular border as they fight for the independence, I guess, or
Yeah. Well, the big question of a united Ireland is always kind of lying there, but you got to respect, the communities in the northeast, like and beyond. You can't just roll over them. Like you say, the threat of violence is always there, and it could blow up. Let's hope the politicians can work that out. That's maybe a bigger question for other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would like, the way it was working fine, but they just they couldn't help themselves, and people tend to forget that it's not, it's only 20 years ago. It's not a long time. These kind of attitudes and the cultures, they don't die in 20 years. So I guess people who in Westminster thought they could push on with something without considering them elements.
Yeah, it almost feels like Westminster just completely didn't consider any unionist people at all, to be honest, with the Brexit thing. So look, I think it's understandable. Yeah, I think it's something that we could talk about for a long time, but we do need to move on, is the plan. So will we talk about our plan, or do you want to talk a little bit about Pat? What would you prefer to go to?
I will talk about quickly about what it's like writing these things.
Okay, yeah, that'll be nice to hear from someone else's perspective.
Yeah. So obviously we got chatting. I loved the podcast. I love what you were doing. I thought it was very important that people can tap into these the history of the Troubles and understand it, and especially, like I said, to be kind of partisan voice, someone who's trying to tell the story and give more facts across to people. So we got the conversation. I really was interested in developing something for myself, but I wanted to kind of test the water and work with you. And so when you were doing the second season, you were good enough to say, pick whatever one compels you the most. And Pat Finucane is always something that interested me for various reasons. But God, did I pick a tough one?
You did. You really did.
I picked a tricky one. This was one of the toughest kind of subjects to delve into. There's so much to it. It's such the incident itself is so brief. A horrific murder, of course, but so brief and executed so quickly. But everything that kind of expanded out of that is pretty big.
Massively dense and complicated, and then for to weave that narrative strand is very, very difficult to convey, to make a clear episode, to have a start and a finish when something that transcends different decades and they're different. There's so many different sides of the story and angles of what happened, and perceptions and rulings and judgments. It's a mammoth. It was a mammoth episode to write.
It was, and in fact, it's a really good representation of Northern Ireland, the Troubles, the story itself. If you pick it apart, it's got a bit of everything in there. It touches on a lot of different elements at play in the Troubles. And just a compelling subject matter. Like Pat Finucane, a very, very interesting person in his own right. Had he lived, I thought he would have been one of the leading figures in Northern Ireland, I would have thought. His legacy, which is often forgotten, is buried under all this kind of what would you call it, political machinations. His legacy, as a solicitor for human rights, was very important to represent a part of Northern Ireland that weren't being represented at the time.
Yeah.
The nationalist side of the community were people that couldn't get jobs, weren't being represented in the courts properly, and he was a strong voice to for them.
I found the shoot to kill things very interesting. The way he was get the person up there in the court, make sure you can see if they were beaten in custody, or he was very, very particular about defending his clients in every sense of the word.
Well, they had rights, and I guess they were kind of the British government were treating them like an enemy, and they were trying to obviously put as much pressure on defeating them as possible. So giving them rights in courts, wasn't something that they wanted to do. So, Pat Finucane was using the rule of law to give everyone the chance, no matter what side you're from. So
it must have taken a very long time to write the episode.
It did. It took a few months. Yeah. Like I said, it started off was like, okay, here's the incident, and then it was like, let's discover about Pat, and I would say, the sources that I had to go to were kind of wide, and to try and find exactly, what he represented as a solicitor and as a person. And then once I'd done that, it's kind of everything that happened after the murder, which is massive. All this cover up that really has been going on for
two or three different intelligence agencies that
all three of them working in Northern Ireland were all involved in some capacity. But I guess we'll go a little bit into that, but if anyone listens to the episode, they can learn all about it, Very, very complicated to find out who knew about it, who was involved. Basically, everyone that planned and carried out the murder on the bottom level were informant to one agency or another, MI5 or to the special branch in the RUC, so that in itself is incredible, really.
Well, and the decision was made for the greater good. Don't reveal this information so that this informer can continue to save lives, I guess, was kind of sounds bonkers, but that was the belief, I guess, of the intelligence agencies, I think, or they were just happy that Republican targets were getting wiped out. Like
there's a lot of different ways you can look at it. You could say that they have to, obviously the security agencies have to continue to protect their own assets if they're to continue their work. And if they start selling these people out, then the whole house of cards comes falling down. If they start revealing their sources, then, the level of their kind of involvement will be kind of revealed, I would have said. And there's, obviously they're fighting the IRA, so that they're not going to be working too hard to save the lives of these people, you would have thought.
Save the lives of people who are trying to protect them, or protect IRA members from getting lengthy prison sentences and all that sort of stuff.
And then there's the other angle to say that they were fully involved and pulling the strings, which is a lot of people's view this point, that the war, in fact, was not about one side of against the other. The British establishment were right in the center, and they were kind of, through one way or another, orchestrating all these different conflicts, through their involvement. They were so deeply entrenched in it, if you know what I mean, that that they've got agents working inside, they're fighting people in all different areas. So very, very complex subject matter. I'm trying to unpick it and just be, what would you say, fair-handed. You don't, you just want to try and present the information as best you can. And
yeah, exactly, without being afraid that you're being perceived as being biased or anything. Like, and I think you do that very well in the Pat Finucane episode. I think the conclusions that are, again, there aren't necessarily conclusions drawn. You're just pulling together what the reports have said, what the inquiries have said, and then posing the question: how far up the chain of command did this go? Was this something that was discussed by Thatcher at the time? So, and even when I posted this online, like, some people were vehemently going, of course, Thatcher did not know anything about this. How dare you even pose the question? And others were like, the dogs in the street knew that Thatcher knew about this. So it's something that the answer, I guess, may come in time, maybe in 70 or 80 years when informant names are revealed, who knows? But yeah, I think that's the important thing. The whole point is catch everybody up and let people draw their own conclusions, or just be at the point at which they now know the exact circumstances surrounding what happened. Yeah,
it's not up to us to make them draw them conclusions ourselves, especially when we don't have the information. Like,
no, absolutely not.
We're researching it and trying our best to get to the bottom of it, but we don't have the information, so we just lay out what people have said and what's already out there in the public. And I guess, there are many reasons why a government wouldn't want to release this information, but I think the biggest reason is because they would show the deep set level of kind of involvement that all these agencies really had. It's slowly coming out bit by bit by bit. But whether the prime ministers of the time, Thatcher's or whoever, knew is a bigger question. So, like you say, people can have their opinions either way.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's mine and yours job to just put everything out there. Lay it out and let you decide.
Yeah, but yeah, an incredible story. The writing process is tough. I guess it gives me a little bit of a taste for what you do all the time, Oisín. A tough job. How do you feel about it? Because it took me, obviously I was working my job and everything, I'm trying to chip away at it bit by bit. I love doing it, but I felt like this is a lot of work.
It's a slog. Well, the way it worked is, I work as a chauffeur. So we got a nice contract that had us working like around 6 a.m, just for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening. So I end up having this 12-hour wedge of time in the middle of the day, which was perfect for researching and writing. And sometimes it was just good to start writing and then jump in, like, as in start putting words on paper. And then as I'm reading or going along, or another time I might try and get into 2 or 3 books and just note everything and then start writing. It changes a lot. But yeah, there's been some episodes. Which one was it? I think it was Dolores Price. It was the disappearance of Jean McConville, where halfway through, on about 3 or 4 different evenings, I just got up and left. And I'd sit down in frustration. I have no idea where to go or how to finish this, or where should I talk about the inquiry? Should I talk about the incident? Should I talk about the survivors? And I just had to walk away because it just couldn't. I couldn't get it down. And eventually you do, and you get it to a position of which you're happy with it. And I'm never fully happy with everything, but I try and just get it exactly the way I like it, or as best I can. And then there's other times where you just you treat the subject matter so, what's the word? You're desensitized. So you're like, oh, that's a great story. Oh, I'll write about that. And then you're writing and suddenly something hits you like a sack of bricks. And like the last one, when I wrote about Richard Moore and Children of the Troubles, I was reading this book by Joe Duffy, it's a kid I talked about, but it was one who he went, like in Ireland, in the old days, we used to take in kids from Chernobyl who've been grown up in very, very impoverished areas, very sick. So we take them into Ireland and give them a summer just to have a great time. And there was always kids in your town from Chernobyl during the summer. So I didn't realize that happened in America. Like in America, a bunch of children from the Troubles in Northern Ireland would go out there just to get a break, I guess, get a real summer to be a child and not to be a child in a war zone. So there was just one of the children I wrote about who all he wanted to do was ride horses in South Dakota. And yeah, he was shot in the head. And like he just literally by a stray bullet, I think it was IRA. And sometimes it just really hits you. Like it's very difficult. I think Thomas Niedermeyer in the first season as well, I found quite difficult. So it's funny. You go through a lot of phases, and it's just I've got a good circle of friends who are kind of interested in the podcast, so I can kind of bounce ideas off them, or I can talk to them about episodes and see how they think. And I was like, did that sound right? Did it sound wrong? And it's very nice having a really good kind of feedback structure as well. So because again, sometimes an episode could be downloaded by 10,000 people, and I could have a huge mistake in the episode. Like I proofed them about 3 or 4 or 5 times, but it just you never know sometimes. And sometimes you don't find out. Something like 10,000 people could listen to it, but nobody gets back to you and says, by the way, there's a mistake here, here, and here. So it's good having kind of a structure of people who kind of, I know actually enjoy listening to it. They're not, and then they'll be quite honest about it as well. So it's interesting, to say the least. I'm looking forward to having a little bit of time off, which is the break between seasons now.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. Yeah, you tapped into a few things. The feelings sometimes. Yeah, it's an emotive subject. Sometimes you get carried up on it. I think the Pat Finucane thing, it was kind of weird. I had a feeling of being back in Belfast, when I lived there.
Yeah.
I went to Malachy's college down the road from where he lived. So it was kind of nostalgic in some ways. In other ways, it was kind of heartbreaking. I guess where to leave off, just rounding off about Pat Finucane, that the case was, and it reminded me a lot of kind of the fallout from the Omagh bomb. I guess the big part of it, the reason it really compelled me to do it, the reason I picked it, although there's lots of really interesting subjects in the Troubles, yourself, the reason I did it was Finucane's kind of fight to find out the truth behind the murder.
Yeah, and they've never stopped. Yeah.
Yeah, it was obviously a hideous crime that they had to see in their own eyes. But also from that, they have been really pursuing the truth behind the murder, who had knowledge and everything that was involved with it, which they, obviously they deserve.
And your granddad was very similar then, wasn't he? He fought for his entire life to find out about the truth behind his wife's killing, I guess.
Yeah, a very, very similar story, obviously kind of different circumstances, but he basically, past a certain point, stopped worrying about those people who planted the bomb and who were involved in the murder on that side, and became more it was his drive to find out who knew what behind the scenes, because in a similar way there are, I don't want to get too much into the evidence or anything, but there are kind of similar kind of parallels with the Pat Finucane thing. There's government agencies that had information. There's kind of dereliction of duty when it comes to the evidence gathering, the prosecution. It's been a little bit of a mess. Obviously, no one's been properly convicted for the Omagh bomb, for the murders. So he spent his remaining years fighting these cases. Basically, he still got an ongoing court case against the RUC and against other authorities as well, to say that they had the information well before time and they could have easily prevented it. This bomb. So I guess there's a lot of questions that arise from that. And funny enough, it's not something I've delved into massively. I have a kind of an overview of it. But obviously the Pat Finucane, that's what drew me to the Pat Finucane case, because how the Finucanes have pursued this, and they've been, forthright in their kind of their opinions of it, but essentially it's
Yeah.
really important that they establish truth, and it's on how we kind of deal with these tragedies, with these traumas, is to explore the truth and to kind of understand it. I think Geraldine said something, we rounded off the podcast, I thought was really important to round off the Pat Finucane podcast with her statement on why it's important that we explore these, and why a public inquiry into a murder such as Pat Finucane's is important. And I feel the exact same way about the Omagh bomb incident,
Yeah.
because there's these kind of traumatic incidents, they need to be explored and understood, and the truth needs to be out about them, so that people can, not repeat these tragedies.
Sorry, you cut out there for that last sentence. Could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. We obviously we need to know the truth about the subject matter, really kind of understand it, so people can understand, just the same way the podcast is helping people doing, and really kind of avoid these kind of future tragedies. Learning and knowledge, that's the most important way for people to really avoid these the violence of the past.
It is something that we're kind of kicking around with, isn't it? That we're just kind of in the early stages of thinking of. So say right now with the podcast, I do one episode devoted to each particular incident, but it was something that you'd mentioned that you were kind of interested in doing, and doing something along the lines of, like, kind of, I guess, the troubles through your eyes in a short personal few episodes, kind of about Omagh, I guess. Is that kind of it, or where is, how do you see it?
Well, I suppose to start off with, it would be interesting to really delve into kind of what happened in Omagh. It's, like I said, it's something that I avoided my whole life, because of how close I was to the subject. But through doing this episode with you, and kind of evaluating the past, my family's past, it's something that I feel like deserves to be heard. And I think the Omagh bomb is one of the biggest incidents in the Troubles, but it's really been swept under the carpet. The victims groups have been pushed to the side. We've been told there'll be no inquest with going into the details of it, and really people want to kind of ignore it, brush it under the carpet, and forget about it. And I think it's important that now we live in a world now where you can create a podcast and you can get information out into the world. I think it's really important to kind of maybe explore the kind of facts of it in a kind of a very similar to maybe your episodes, but in a kind of a bit in a detailed fashion. But also maybe with a little bit of kind of like my family story a little bit, just, and really kind of explore it and really understand it. I think it'll be difficult to do for me. It's going to be very emotional to really understand kind of what happened at the time, not just from a factual point of view, but it's going to be obviously an emotional journey. But I think it's something that I hope to just kind of understand it better for myself, and maybe if we're lucky, we create something that people can kind of look at the incident and kind of understand more themselves, and kind of and be part of I think it's really important to be part of the truth telling process. That's how Northern Ireland's going to heal itself. It's for the people that are involved in these incidents to tell their truth and to speak it to others. And I think it's incredibly important to do that,
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. So now it's something we're just kicking around the idea of. You're a busy guy, you've young kids, busy job. So we'll it's something that I would love to figure out what we could do with it, but we're still in the early days of just kind of talking and seeing if it's something we can make happen.
Yeah,
but I'm on board, and I'm pretty sure you are too. So it's just a matter of seeing if we can do the time, if we can time them right.
we'll be planning it out. And obviously, your knowledge now that you have of the troubles, you're becoming an expert, Oisín. That's what you're becoming through.
Doesn't feel like it sometimes.
Every couple of weeks, you're getting that extra knowledge. You know what I mean? And like I said before, and it's no word of a lie. The Troubles podcast was really helpful for me, and I think it's really important. So it'd be really good to do this project as a part of the Troubles kind of project, and it'll just be kind of maybe a slightly more personal, deeper look at one of the incidents, and hopefully we can, you know what I mean, we can tell the story and really understand it better. And like I said, I don't. It'll take me to maybe understand a bit more about my grandfather and grandmother, their lives up to that point. What my granddad, why my granddad was, he was, struggling so much, because a lot of other people just wanted to put it behind him, but he certainly wasn't one of them. He was a big, very, very strong voice. And someone who kind of eventually beat his own path because he felt that he wasn't getting the support for what he thought the truth actually was, The court case, I think, is maybe close to 15, 20 years old now. I think.
Jeez.
I think the original papers that I found were kind of early 2000s, whenever it first started,
I think we'd have a lot to tell. I think there's a lot to unpack in it,
There will be, yeah. But like I said, the big thing for me is I have a knowledge of it, but I've not went into it, and it's kind of, I feel like it's going to be a bit of a personal journey as well, so yeah, it'll be really important.
Fingers crossed.
I think it'll work. I think obviously we're going to do it kind of together in a way. So that's going to be fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I said, I'm in the just finished season 2 now. So the plan is to take a couple of months breaks, but really I've got like about 10 books here to jump into and plot season 3. But it's all very loose. If let's see how this works out, and if we could fit this in somewhere along the way, I'd be delighted to. I think it'd be I think it would fit into the canon or the body of work. It'd be an amazing addition to it.
Yeah. I agree. I think it would be. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
I think we should probably leave it there.
Yeah, that's everything.
Yeah, just about. I think when I sit down on Zoom, I could talk for hours, but I realize that sometimes not the most people don't really want to listen for hours too. So it doesn't often work both ways.
No, that's fine. Well, I hope it's been, an interesting chat at least.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for coming on. Thank you for writing the episode. I've really enjoyed not having to write an episode for once.
Oh yeah. I picked a real good one anyway.
Yeah, you certainly did. You could have picked like the kidnapping of Sugar or like kidnapping of a horse, but you went straight for the probably the most complicated episode that's featured on this podcast yet. So
yeah. Anyway, brilliant chatting to you, Oisín. And thanks very much for having me on as well. And I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. See ya.